So thank you, Alex, for joining us. We are really grateful to have you as a speaker today. Um, I think I won't take more of your time, so I'll pass the word to you. Feel free to say a few words about yourself. If I'm missing something or you just want to add something.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for the awesome introduction. Thank you everybody for being here, taking time in the middle of your day or the beginning of your day or the end of the day, depending on where you are joining us from, or for those of you who are watching this later on. Thanks for tuning into the replay. We were talking about what would be useful or interesting to folks on the OfficeRnD community, as well as people that are beyond the OfficeRnD community, people that are, I know some folks are on my list as well. And the topic of growth and expansion has been a big one. In fact, I met some of the OfficeRnD team at the Coworking Asia, the CU Asia conference, which was in India back in February. That was where we actually connected in person for the first time. And the topic of growth is definitely on the minds of lots of people in the co-working world. Either people trying to figure out how to grow, or they are growing and now they have new problems to solve. And as Michaela said, you know, the one of the advantages I have, probably my biggest advantage over anything else, is time. Having been, this is our 13th year, so we've been through a bunch of different variations and versions. And people, it's interesting to me, people talk about big co-working spaces and small co-working spaces, because in my mind, it's all very relative. We started out as a very small co-working space, just 1,800 square feet, and then have incrementally grown over the years. These days, we operate almost 17,000 square feet total. We're just one location. Our growth and expansion model has always been training and education and helping other people who are in their local communities grow and be successful, which is part of why I'm here with you today. So yeah, about 350 or so members today, sharing our space and growing, working on some exciting things this year to continue growing our community in some new and interesting ways. But we wanted to do a Q&A. Q&A is one of my favorite ways to get to know new people, get to know what's on people's minds, and do sort of a deeper dive into some of the questions that each of you have. So there's a link that I just pasted in the chat room, where we're going to be following along based on those questions. So if you have questions that you did not get the chance to submit beforehand, that is the place to do it. If you want to peek there and sort of see what's coming up, there is also the opportunity to vote. I'm going to be working on the questions from the top down, the top being the most voted on question. And all of these questions are related to scaling, operations, growth, moving, all these kinds of topics. So unless anyone's got any other questions, I guess just to reinforce, this is being recorded. Video will be sent out later. I'm expecting they'll be here for about 35, 45 minutes if you're planning for your next meeting as well. And I'm hoping to be able to stay in touch with all of you. So you can always reach out to me and follow up. Either email me, alex@indyhall.org, or you can follow me on Twitter. At Alex Hillman is one of the best places to get me live. Those are two of the best places to reach me if I'm not able to get to your question because we run out of time, or if you have a follow-up question or an adjacent question that's not exactly relevant to this topic of growth and scaling. So I think that's my housekeeping notes. I'm going to get right into questions unless anybody has something else for me to do. We're going to start with the very first question, which is from John. I'm not sure if that's same Jonathan that is here in the chat room with us today. But John asks, how do you approach the creation and implementation of processes once you face the need to have such? Things like sales, onboarding, billing process, etc. I'm so glad this question's at the top because it is one of I think the most interesting and important questions to answer, and also a pretty common it's related to a bunch of common mistakes that I think people make when they're getting started. That being people over-engineering processes before a process is even needed, and being kind of unwilling to get down in the muck and figure out how to make a process good before you codify it, before you write it down, before you systematize things. So To talk a little bit about approach, I think it's worth backing up a little bit and starting with the fact that I think it's really important to take advantage of the fact before you're big that you are not yet big, right? And big is obviously relative, but if you have the ability to have one-on-one interactions with everyone who's coming in the door, with meet every new member, I think it's really important to do that. The reason it's important to do that is because when you're doing that early stage community building, you start to get to notice what are the really important interactions. What are the interactions that create value? What are the things that people understand? What are the things that people get confused by? And when you try to create process around everything too early, it's not that it's too rigid, it's that you lose the visibility into all the little ways you could make it better. So over the years, historically, we've done things manually, probably for longer than we should have. If we're thinking about just even software, we started before there was any co-working software. And I don't say that to be, all, back in my day, but we're fortunate that we have amazing and always getting better tools and, lots of selection to choose from, and a lot of people that are working on making tools that are better for co-working spaces. But I always remind people that we ran Indy Hall out of a spreadsheet for a very long time. And one of the advantages to not automating things is you learn the detail, you learn the nuance, and you learn how good you can make it, how good of an experience you can make it for the member. And that's always priority number one, right? Is helping people feel like they know what's going to happen next, like they know what to expect, and also for people to feel like you're paying attention. One of my favorite examples of something that still to this day we do not automate is taking attendance of who is in the space. That's something that, in the grand scheme of things, does take an amount of effort and time, but it's effort and time that I think creates a lot of value in the fact that it means that someone on my team at least a few times a day is walking around and paying attention to who is in the room. That's something that we call it Flintstoning. If you think about the cartoon The Flintstones, where driving the car wasn't really an engine, it was sticking your feet through the ground and pedaling. A lot of the early processes are going to be Flintstoned. It's going to be something that you wire up kind of manually or semi-manually so that you can tweak it, so you can make it a little bit better. And then when you feel really good about the experience that it creates, then you can document it. Then you can find ways to automate it. When it comes to process and automation, I think where it becomes important to start introducing first process, then automation, is when things start slipping through the cracks. So one of my favorite examples, we were actually just talking about this in my co-working brain trust group that I run with other operators yesterday, is, we've got folks that come through our spaces for all different kinds of reasons. They're coming in for an event, they're coming in for a tour, they're coming in to visit another member. They just so happen to be in the neighborhood and they want to see what co-working is all about, whatever it might be. And then they have that experience. Most people don't decide to join right after having that first experience. So they may have a couple of those touch points. Then they do decide, you know what, I want to actually take this co-working thing for a spin. They do a trial day or a trial run, things like that. And they come in for the trial and sometimes like, yeah, this is really great. I'm going to figure out my finances, or I'm going to look at my schedule and come back and actually sign up. And in each of these kind of phases, people drop off, right? um, Even after people join, people sign up and then they forget to come in. That sounds silly, but we have to remember that as busy as we are running our co-working spaces, the people who are interested in our communities and our spaces, interested in getting value from it, they're busy and distracted too. It's our job to be able to know where they are and follow up and things like that. So a lot of people would look at that and say, well, you need a CRM. The problem with CRMs in my mind is they're all focused on closing the sale, closing the deal, getting people through a pipeline. When in reality, what I want to do is keep track of just who I know, who I've met, what information we've collected about them over the time. If I had a conversation, if one of my teammates had a conversation, if they mentioned interest in a particular event, people whose first impression is one of our monthly open houses have a different first impression or expectation than somebody who comes in for one of our meetup groups evening events and things like that. So all these little bits of context have been lost over the years. We meet people and then we forget to follow up. We meet people and no one else in the team knows that we met them. Somebody comes in and has a great first experience or signs up, but there's no follow through. And so I'm always looking for processes and automations. The first thing to optimize, I think the most important thing to optimize, is where things fall through the cracks. Where do you create a touch point with somebody and then lose touch with them? And remember, this isn't explicitly sales. Remember, before somebody's actively considering membership, but also after somebody joins. So many people go through co-working onboarding processes that, the good ones give them an idea of, who else is in the community and what are some of the things you can get involved in to help you connect with other people. A lot of them are just, here's the coffee, here's how to book a conference room, here's how your billing works, and then they're off to the races, and there's no continuing touch points, whether it's in person or automated or semi-automated over email, to make sure that people are continually being followed up with. The the key here with all this processing, though, is that it's iterative, right? So we've built out processes. For instance, I mentioned this sort of CRM-like thing that I'm describing. We ended up building that using a tool called Airtable. I'm a big fan of Airtable. For anyone who's used to dropping lots of information into spreadsheets, but then your spreadsheets get kind of unruly. Spreadsheets are great for number crunching and kind of organizing information in a grid. And then at a certain point, it gets out of hand. Airtable steps in when it gets out of hand, because it lets you treat something that looks like a spreadsheet a little bit more like a database. And in fact, in a minute, I can actually pull it up and do a little screen share and show you what we've built to help keep track of those things. But it's not just that place where the information goes. I'm trying to get information from as many places as I can, because we've got people booking tours in one system. We have people managing their memberships, their billing and membership changes in another system. We have events happening in yet another system. And I think all-in-one systems can be good, but they don't necessarily provide the best experience for all of the individual components. So we've actually chosen to kind of wire lots of different pieces together, and have ended up using Airtable as sort of the main brain in between all of those other things. The other tool that wires so many of our processes together is a tool called Zapier. And if you haven't used Zapier yet, I highly, highly, highly recommend it. Zapier is one of these things that turns all kinds of internet tools into like building blocks. You have, your scheduling software and your membership software and your calendar software, and people submitting forms about, membership surveys and all kinds of other things. But those things don't necessarily talk to each other. Zapier makes it so you can make them talk to each other and actually create events and timers and all kinds of other things. So I'm going to actually share my screen while we're still on this question and show you what our Airtable looks like. So you should be able to see Airtable up on my screen, and I have the CRM tab open. We are still calling it a CRM, but I think it's more of a relationship manager than really any other CRM that's out there. And as you can see, we've got this column over here on the left. Please don't steal our members' contact information. I really should have obscured that. But you get the idea here, that we've got members, their email address, their name, whether or not they've come to one of our open hall events, have they come in for a tour. Here's a really big one. When people miss a tour, we actually have a little formula in here that keeps track of, is the date that they signed up for a tour in the past, and were they assigned a tour guide or not? And if they were not assigned a tour guide, then we know that we have to follow up with them and say, hey, you missed your tour. Little things like that show members that we're paying attention. And this tool makes it so that we don't have to keep all that stuff in our brain. It lets you do things like I mentioned, assigning a tour guide. And then we have this UI here where I can actually see who of our team has toured each of these people. So if I meet somebody and they have maybe a different expectation of what Indy Hall is supposed to be like, or they said something and I'm like, I'm not sure where they would have gotten that information from, I can go back and say, who toured that person? Did they leave any notes about them? And things like that. We do have this notes field that each of us add to over time. And the really cool thing about this entire Airtable grid that keeps track of, when they joined, when they applied to join, what membership level they're on now and in the past, so on and so forth. every time something changes in here, regardless of who changes it, it also sends an update into our Slack, which is another tool that, while I wouldn't consider Slack a process tool in and of itself, it allows us to, where there is not a formal process, share information so that everyone else on the team knows what's going on. I think that's the other key element around process for us, besides creating really good experiences for our members and making sure things don't fall through the cracks because there are more of them. That is generally what happens as communities scale, is more people means more things fall through the cracks, more opportunities for mistakes, more opportunities for errors and things like that. The other thing is, as our team has grown to support more members, is more people needing to know what everyone else is up to. So the other area of process that was not specifically in John's question, but I think should be as you're growing, is really thinking about your internal communication process as a team. What are you doing to check in with each other? What are you doing to make sure that everyone that's having conversations with members is also sharing what they're learning about what's going on in members' lives and their businesses back with the rest of the team? Because all of that information is such valuable context. Um, the more we know about what our members are up to, what they're doing, what they're enjoying about their work, what they're frustrated about in their work, is all clues for us to figure out ways that we can be valuable, and also ways that we can figure out how to help people help each other. That's really at the heart of the community-based co-working model that we've been running for over a decade, and we really focus on helping other people do. It's not how do we use all this information so that we do all the work. It's that we use all this information, we use all this process, and we use all these tools to give us a, as consistent as possible, bird's eye view of what's going on in the community. So when a member has a question or an idea, or when multiple members have asked the same question, but maybe to different team members, but we don't know that yet, we need to be in sync enough that we can say, hey, each of us has had different conversations with different people about the same thing. I wonder if they're talking to each other. The answer is generally no. And at that point, our process is not to do the thing for them. The process is to assemble them as a group and say, hey, you all came to us with the same kind of idea, or you all came to us and had the same kind of question. And so we thought, why not have a conversation about that together? I think those are the kinds of things that happen kind of organically when communities are small and everybody knows each other. And so those conversations happen naturally among friends. But we're talking about co-working spaces getting bigger. When your co-working space breaks, honestly, just 50, 75 people or so, you already have sub-communities forming. You already have micro communities forming within your bigger community. And part of your job is to recognize that not all of them are going to be talking to each other, because not all of them are going to be, best friends who are checking in with each other all day long. So you kind of have to be the ones to figure out what is our process for being the eyes and ears for everyone, and then reflecting that information back. Doing that internally for us means we've got as much proactive communication in our staff only chat room as possible. Hey, I just had this conversation with member X, and their business is doing really well and they're really excited and they're thinking about hiring. For us, that's useful information to know, because we may want to know that they're going to be growing, which could be good for us. They have more members coming on. It could also mean if they're growing quickly, they may be eventually leaving us. And a common process that's missing from growing co-working spaces is paying attention to when their individuals become teams, and when their teams realize maybe a co-working space is not the right place for me anymore. Having part of your process around checking in with those folks, checking in with those team leads, is just as important as all of the processes around billing and onboarding and things like that. So having that set up as recurring to-dos, or having a calendar item. I don't think there's a single specific right tool for it. The right tool is the one you use. So if you're already like a Google Calendar fiend and you want to put events on your Google Calendar, do that. If you are more of a to-do list type person, and recurring to-do lists is something that would be useful to you, having an item to put on your checklist, check it off when it's done, but then have that item come back maybe the next day or the next week or the next month. I would take a look at, there's two tools that I would recommend for process-oriented checklists. One of them, full disclosure, this is created by a business partner in another business of mine. It's a product called PEP, PEP, which you can check out at pep.cards. I get no kickback on that. But PEP is like a card-based to-do list. So if you're familiar with Trello, for instance, PEP looks a little bit like Trello, except you can arrange cards into workflows, right? So with Trello, for instance, you have cards where you're kind of moving an item from this needs to get done to I'm doing it to done. But if you have a task that has multiple steps inside of it, there's not really a good way to handle that. And that's where PEP takes over, where you can say, to create my weekly marketing blog post, I have to come up with a concept. I have to do a little bit of research. I have to talk to some members for some quotes. I have to do an outline. I have to do a first draft. I have to get it edited, so on and so forth. All the little things that need to happen along the way in order to get that marketing post published. You may be able to do that yourself because you're good at it. But if you ever want to hand that task off to somebody else, or if you ever want to make sure you're not forgetting important steps, like with marketing posts, for instance, I see people write posts, publish them, and then forget to promote them, forget to line up social media posts, forget to share them with the community. Don't rely on your brain, right? To remember to do all the steps. That's where process comes in. So PEP is a tool that lets you build out those workflows, use them yourself, as well as share them with your team. So if you start doing a task and you bring on another person, the workflow is sort of self-documented, and they can go through and they can see what it looks like. And it is set up so that it can be recurring. So you can say this workflow needs to be completed every Tuesday, or this needs to be completed on the first of every month, or this needs to be completed every time there's a new member, whatever it might be. Another tool that we really like for that is a to-do list app called Todoist, which is a more straightforward to-do app. It doesn't have any of the really great workflow features that PEP does, but it does have a really nice setup for doing shared to-do lists with recurring tasks. So between these tools, my team has built out their own workflows, which I think is super important. Maybe I think my last point that I want to make on this question, which is if you have more than just you running your co-working space, which if you're talking about scaling is probably the case, you creating workflows and processes for other people is a really great way for you to spend a lot of time doing something that other people either end up not using, which is bad, or maybe worse, using but hating. And I say that's worse because I want my team to love their job, because their job is to be they're the only person who has to be here, right? Every member that's here is here by choice. My team needs to be just as happy to be here as everyone else that chose to be here. And so giving them things that they hate doing, or ways of doing it that don't fit them, is a really great way to screw that up. So we do a lot of collaborative process building, where a lot of times at the most, I'll make it my job to identify a problem. That could be a business problem. That could be a communication problem. That could be a thing that I'm noticing, hey, this seems like the only time it gets done is when I bring it up. Or when something is broken, right? When those are two elements are happening more than once or more than a couple times, that says to me, we need a process. Or in your mind, there's something not great about the way we do it. So why don't you, and I'm saying, speaking to my teammate, why don't you tell me what you think would be the steps to make this happen? Giving your team the opportunity to take ownership over the processes. And that includes processes that already exist. When we onboard a new team member, we teach them what the things that they need to know how to do are, but we also tell them the only reason anything is the way that it is because that's the way that it is. Nothing in here is carved into stone. If you think there's a way to do something better, or if you think there's a way that you will fit your workflow better, let's have that conversation. I want my team to take ownership over processes, not simply execute them. That's the stuff that you give to robots, right? So team ownership is key to developing processes. And then thinking about automation in terms of, my favorite way to describe automation is finding things that humans forget to do, but humans need to do, and using robots to remind the humans how to do their job well, right? So I think of automation and process as sort of like an Iron Man suit. It still needs a human inside, but a well-designed process or a well-designed system is going to help that human do their job better, faster, more consistently, or just with more confidence, right? So that's a lot of pieces to that, but I hope a satisfactory answer to John's question about developing process as you scale, not just your business, your community, as well as your team. Whew. I'm going to take a sip of water before I move into our next question.
Cool. Thanks, Alex. That makes a lot of sense.
Our next question is from Natalie. And the question says, I'm expanding our space with an additional floor and want to engage our community in the process and make them feel involved and heard. Ideas on how to do this? Well, first of all, Natalie, congratulations on wanting to do that. That is a huge step in the right direction. Involving members in the process, whether it's an expansion or a move, or even something as simple as rearranging things, is incredible for creating buy-in, for exactly as you said, having them feel involved and heard, feeling a sense of ownership over the space. I can speak with confidence, having been through this many, many times, whether it's an expansion or I mentioned we've moved a couple of times. Involving our members in the process does two really important things. One is it makes sure that I'm not working in a vacuum, right? It's very easy for me to make decisions. That's not very easy. It is, but it's easy for me to end up in a vacuum making decisions and maybe even feeling uncertain if my decision is going in the right direction. There's lots of ways to, really accomplish any kind of, solve any kind of problem, but having members' perspective in the mix means that at the very least, you're confident that they're not going to be pissed off about what you do or decide. So having them involved, in a way, is more than just plausible deniability. It's sometimes a way to find a hidden option C. And I'll get to that in a second. So how do you make them feel involved and heard? And I'm going to add a little bit of subtext to the question that's not here, but I hear very often, which is, how do I involve people without turning this into chaos, right? I want people to feel involved, but what if I don't like their decisions or their ideas? What if their ideas are not very good? Or what if their ideas are so off the wall and they're going to spend all my money, or they're going to, break the way things work? Well, I can say with a fair bit of confidence that they probably won't. One or two people might, but it's also up to you to decide what actually gets implemented, right? So we practice this annually. In fact, even when we're not expanding, when we're not moving, we do something annually that we call Reboot. And Reboot, we treat like an event. It's generally a 3-day weekend where we ask all of our full-time members to pack up their things. We provide boxes. We store everything securely for a weekend. And in the weeks leading up to that weekend, we start having conversations. And these are the things that are, I think, relevant to your question here, Natalie, which is, how do you start? We start by having conversations that with lots of advance notice, let people know as much as we can say and as much as they should know about what's going to happen. What's the timeline? How much are we expanding to? What are some of the goals of expanding? These are the kinds of things that I want to share up front to get people, not just in my mind, but avoid people making up their own version of the story, right? So a lot of times we'll sort of hold back information because we're not sure what the answer is, or we don't want to give the wrong answer, or the answer might change. I think it's much better to simply say that and say, I don't know the answer to the question, but here's a couple of options that we're considering, or this isn't set in stone, but here's the direction we're headed. Because if you don't provide that information, people will make up their own version, and the versions they make up will always be the worst case scenario. They'll generally make the biggest assumptions. They'll worry that things are going to happen to them rather than with them involved. So sort of trying to preempt what people's concerns would be, which depending on your relationship with your community and how often you talk to people, you may know what those things are, but more often than not, a really good place to start is to share the information about the expansion. Here's what's going on. Here are some of the decisions that have already been made, but here are some of the decisions that haven't been made yet. And I'd like to involve anyone who's interested in those decisions in those conversations. In the context of an expansion, in this case, an additional floor, it's a little tough without knowing more detail here, but I like trying to break a big project like that, an expansion or a relocation or a large scale redesign, into smaller pieces. For instance, are you going to have common areas in this expansion, additional common areas? Is there going to be a kitchen? Is there going to be meeting rooms? Is there going to be, are things built out, or are you building out or using things that are already built out? And using each of these sort of, if you think about them like zones or uses or use cases, as ways to invite people into the process based on things that they specifically care about. The reality is your members probably won't care about the fact that you're expanding. They might be a little bit excited about it. They might be a little bit nervous about it. It's good to be open about that full range of emotions that they're likely feeling. But no one's going to be thinking about it all day, every day like you are. What they will be thinking about is how elements of this expansion can make their day better or potentially worse. So thinking about the what are the elements of this expansion? Like I said, are there things that that they're going to like, that are going to make things better, that are going to solve specific problems that you hear about? Or is it just more space? If it's just more space, then I think your first step is to figure out, why are you expanding in the first place, and how can having access to more space improve things for the member experience, not just for the co-working space being bigger, if that makes sense. So these early conversations are to sort of take the pulse, get an idea of what people are, what they care about, and what things they'd want to get involved in. I treat those as sort of a brainstorming session. And I like to set the context of, this is blue sky. You can think of anything you want. You can suggest anything you want. No promises that we'll do everything. No promises we'll do everything right away. But this is to get an idea of what we want, and also why. If people are saying we want to see something, we want to do something, we want to create it a certain way, you can ask them why. And it doesn't need to be like a deep philosophical why, but like, is there a reason for that? What would you, if they want if somebody's interested in a particular resource, like let's say a podcasting studio, like, are they the only one who's interested in podcasting? Are there other people that'd be interested in recording? It's kind of a weird example coming off the top of my head, probably because I'm sitting in our podcasting studio. But that was the thing that came out of member conversations. People were recording shows or interested in recording shows, and said, is there a way we could start doing that here? And what would it take to have that flesh out? Treat it as a brainstorm. Make it clear that not going to do everything, maybe not all at once, but you'll pick some of the best ideas and you'll use their input to prioritize, right? That's the key, is letting them know that your input is heard. And that means that when you collect all that feedback, it's also your job to round up that feedback and share it back. So anytime we have one of those brainstorming sessions, the follow through is almost as important as the brainstorming session itself. I'll take notes on all the things that we heard, and I'll say, here are some common themes. Here are some of the top priorities. Here's how some of your top priorities align with some of our top priorities. Here's some things that I heard, and it's not that they're bad ideas, but I don't think we're going to get to them right now. They're just not top priority, or maybe there's even specific reasons why it doesn't make sense, and try to share what that is. Getting them involved in the decision-making process, even though you're the one making the decision, you're making the decision based on their involvement, their input. The second piece to this is the physical work, right? So for our reboots and for your expansion, or for adding an additional location or relocation, whatever it might be, once you've got sort of the brainstorm, you start building out a game plan, you can start looking at each element of the game plan as a project, something that people can do, something that people can contribute to. And, that could be as simple as, is there something, my favorite example is really, really simple, is having people come in with paint rollers, and being a part of maybe painting, maybe not the entire space, but maybe painting a wall or a section of the space, or assembling furniture is another really common one that's often overlooked. A lot of times it's the stuff that actually will cost you money during your setup, your expansion, when there are people in your community that are into the DIY, or have experience, maybe it fits their professional experience. In our case, we would have paid thousands of dollars to run all the Ethernet and wireless in our newest location, but we have enough people here that have crimped wires before, and have actually done network design, that we just had that conversation and we were able to DIY that ourselves. It saved us money and it got people involved in the process. Still takes our leadership, but it's giving people the opportunity to show up, get their hands a little bit dirty, and actually complete a task. Um, the key is, I think, in all of this is expectations, and remembering that you're not asking people to do things for you. You're asking people to do things with you and with each other. That's part of the communication of it. That's got to be part of the tone that's being set, and that has to be part of the execution. When we do our reboot weekends, where we're moving, I'm in the mix, my team's in the mix. Sometimes we even have friends of the community who aren't members, but we've been publicizing that, hey, we're going to be working on this space together, this kind of big group project. It's just a really great opportunity to be away from a desk and actually meet some people while you're working on the physical elements of the space. And I'll tell you what, it sounds like a lot of work, because it is. It absolutely is. I could do an entire webinar on how we run town halls from start to finish, how we run these community conversations, these brainstorming, these community involvement events, because they really are kind of extended multi-phase events. But the outcome is really the key. And the outcome here is the difference between somebody who comes into a co-working space and uses it, sees it as a place to be, sees it as a thing to consume, a resource, a relative commodity, where the difference between your co-working space and another co-working space is maybe what furniture they have, or the location, or the price point. When somebody has helped paint the wall, when somebody has helped design the kitchen layout, when somebody has helped learn how the network works so that you can actually build it out, the sense of ownership that people feel, you see it when they show up, you see it when they bring friends, you see it when they bring colleagues. It's not the co-working space where they work, it's their co-working space. This is a very hard thing to create when you are already big. It is much, much easier to create it when you're smaller and as you grow. So if you're in a growth phase, an expansion, I always say an expansion of any kind is a perfect time to get people involved, because there's a lot of work to be done. And most commonly, things like expansions and redesigns and remodels end up being things that are done to members, right? I say it that way really, really to emphasize, when members feel like they are not a part of the process, it is somebody else making the decisions, somebody else making it all happen. And if they don't like it, well, it happened to them. There's not really much say they had in the matter. But when people are involved in it, they don't have to love every aspect of it, because they helped create it. And people take better care of the things that they play a role in creating. And that's something that, as you grow, involving more and more of your community in it actually makes more sense. Because if you think about the difference between, your founding members, the people who were there at the beginning when you're kind of strapping everything together and that initial vibe, and it kind of dies off over time. Whenever you're moving or expanding or going through this annual process that looks kind of like it, but we invent for the sake of our community, it kind of rejuvenates the community, because it makes everyone feel like they're a part of the start again, because you're kind of creating a fresh start. So you can use all of that language in the communication and setting those expectations and actually inviting people to be a part of it. I think that's the key, though, is inviting people to be a part of it. Don't tell them what's going to happen. I mean, that's a piece of it. You have to give them information, but invite them to be a part of it and say, here's what's going to happen. Here's how you can be involved. Here's how your participation and contribution is going to make the experience better for you and the other people around you. And that actually resonates with a lot of people. And the people that it doesn't, that's okay. You don't have to convince them. Focus on the ones who want to get involved and activate them. When they're activated, other people will see them, and some of them will want to get involved the next time. So another sort of long answer to a really good question from Natalie about expansion. I hope that answers some of your questions. If there are specifics to your scenario, I'm always very interested in that. If you're unsure of what elements you can or should get people involved with, feel free to shoot me an email. Let me know a little more detail. Maybe we can do it like a follow-up post about that of some kind. And as we're coming up on the last 15 minutes or so of the hour, there is another question that I do want to touch on briefly from someone posted anonymously about a second location. Um, and the question says, will a second location at a walking distance cannibalize the first? How do I avoid that or deal with it if it happens? So I see questions like this a lot where people are opening up second locations near a first location, or even opening up second locations on the other side of a town. And I always start by asking, why are you opening a second location in the first place? Uh, and the most common answer that I get is because, well, there's a really good opportunity. There's a building that I saw that I thought would be a great co-working space and a great second location. And the first one's, it's going pretty well. We're still growing. It's still going okay. Um, I think very commonly people are opening a second location, regardless of where it is, either I would argue too soon a lot of the time. They're not opening it based on demand, which is what this question kind of makes me think is where this question is coming from. If you're worried about one location cannibalizing another, that says to me you're opening co-working spaces based on where you think co-working spaces should be, not based on where members are or want to be, which I think is a much, much, much better place to start. If you're starting from an empty space and then trying to fill it, will it cannibalize? Won't it? I don't know. There's no way to know for sure. But it's definitely a risk that is avoidable when you start by developing a new co-working space based on demand, based on where community actually is, or in this particular case, if there is demand for more space nearby, maybe because your current space is full, or maybe because your current space isn't optimized. It's not set up the way that serves your members or all of your members in the ways that you want to. One of the ways around two spaces being near each other is offering distinctly different experiences, right? So maybe your first space is, kind of upscale and officey, and you kind of, copied the big box co-working spaces because you thought that's what you're supposed to do, and maybe even managed to get some people in it, but it's not really the vibe you had in your head when you were imagining this whole thing coming together. But you are able to rent out those offices, you are able to rent out those desks. Maybe it's just to a different kind of clientele, but because of that, there are people that you actually want to be around, or that your members, some of your members would prefer some place that's maybe a little more creative versus officey, or maybe it's just like different worldviews. Is it the place for freelancers and entrepreneurs, or is the place for startups and teams? Those are really different experiences that if you really want to, if there's a very good reason for you to be running more than one co-working space, I would say it's either to continue doing more of what you've already gotten very good at. And if you can't tell me honestly that your first co-working space is awesome and profitable, then you have no business opening a second co-working space. If it is, and you're opening a second co-working space, you've got two options: is to learn from everything you did before and try and improve on it, or create a complementary version that maybe serves a different community, a different category of people who maybe want to join your space, but it's not quite the right fit, that sort of thing. So the only way it cannibalizes is if they're basically identical cookie cutter, silly kind of dollhouse of a workspace setups that I think people come up with when they see an office available, they see a piece of real estate available, they go, what a perfect location for a co-working space. If that happens in your head and you start asking questions like this, that's a great clue that you can stop yourself right there and go back to the fundamentals. And remember that building co-working spaces based on groups of people who actually want to come together, rather than finding a piece of real estate, signing all the paperwork, and then later going, well, shoot, who's going to use this thing? When you choose the second version of that story, you've made your life very, very difficult and very likely set yourself up for failure. That's like the leading cause of failing co-working spaces, even when the first one was successful. And I think it's because people don't take the time to stop and think, what made the first one work in the first place? And maybe before I open a second location, I should get better at running that first one. It's very rare that I meet somebody who's opened a second or third location that didn't somehow make their first location worse. That's true. And I think that's worth being aware of, is your attention is going to be divided. you get some economy of scale, but your resources will now be distributed, and every additional space you operate will make the other ones you operate generally a little bit worse. Take that into account. And if operating multiple spaces is really important to you, and I'm not saying you should or shouldn't, that means, in my mind, you should make that first space amazing before you start opening your second, third, fourth, and so on. Make that first one as good as you possibly can, and then take all of those lessons and use those lessons to start building out your second, third, fourth, and so on. I think that's all I've got time for today, but I hope this was useful. I hope the answers to these questions were valuable for you as you're thinking about your growth, your expansion, considering your options. Again, if you've got follow-up questions, want me to go deeper into a particular aspect of any of these questions, drop me an email, alex@indyhall.org, or hit me up on Twitter @AlexHillman, and I'd love to hear from you, and I'd love to hear about how your co-working space and community are growing.
Okay, wow, that was awesome, Alex. Thank you so much. Guys, please do write with additional questions to Alex. He will be so willing to answer them, so please do. Thanks for joining us. We'll follow up with the recording probably next week. Meanwhile, I really encourage you to follow Alex on Twitter, on social media, and definitely visit his site, dangerouslyawesome.com, and sign up for his newsletter, because trust me, this is an awesome newsletter. Also, don't forget to follow us on social and to sign up for our newsletter. You can find us at OfficeRnD.com. And thanks once again for being with us today, and hope to see you soon on our next webinar.
If I might plug one more thing before we go, for those of you who are familiar with the Coworking Google group, maybe you have not been paying attention the last month or so. If you're unfamiliar with the Coworking Google group, it's one of the earliest resources, one of the longest running resources for co-working operators on the entire internet. We actually migrated that to a new platform in the last month or so. And the new platform is at forum.coworking.org. You can go and sign up there. It's free. Anyone can sign up. It's open. And you can find the archives of over a decade of conversations among fellow operators, people that are just getting started, people that are growing, all the different ways that people have found problems and solved problems. I'm working hard on finishing up the move, but I do want to extend that invitation to all of you to come join us over on forum.coworking.org.
Yeah, please do support that community, because we had a discussion with Alex. It's an awesome community and contains so much valuable information that it should be supported.
Cool. Okay. Thank you.
So, thank you, Alex, and thanks once again to all that join us. See you next time. Bye.
Bye-bye.